March 15, 2001, a day like any other at Istanbul's Ataturk Airport. Among the travelers were the 162 souls booked on Vnukovo Airlines Flight 2806, a routine flight from Istanbul to Moscow. As the aircraft lifted into the clear blue sky, leaving Istanbul behind, a sense of normalcy pervaded the cabin. High above the earth, the mundane sounds of air travel were shattered. 3 men, their movements swift and calculated, rose from their seats, brandishing weapons. Panic swept through the aircraft like a shockwave. The hijackers barked orders in Russian, their voices amplified by a chilling calmness. The flight attendants, their training kicking in amidst the terror, struggled to maintain a semblance of calm. The initial shock gave way to a chilling realization. They were trapped, hurtling through the sky in a metal tube transformed into a prison of fear. The hijackers, their features obscured by balaclavas, moved with a chilling purpose, their weapons a constant reminder of the precariousness of the situation. The passengers, stripped of their anonymity and reduced to hostages, huddled together, their faces reflecting a mixture of terror and disbelief. Among the passengers, a young Russian woman named Anya sat frozen in her seat, her heart pounding. Anya clutched her handbag tightly, her knuckles white with tension. Inside was a small worn photograph of her fiancé, Sergei. Now, as the hijackers paced the aisle, Anya's dreams turned to ashes. Time seemed to stretch and distort, each tick of the clock a hammer blow to Anya's already frayed nerves. Despite the overwhelming fear, a flicker of defiance began to stir in the hearts of some passengers. Whispers, hushed and hesitant at first, spread through the cabin. A burly Russian man leaned towards his seatmate, his voice low and gravelly. "We cannot let them break us." The flight attendants, caught between their duty and the threat, moved through the cabin with a quiet grace, offering a silent message of hope. The hijackers, their faces obscured by balaclavas, paced the narrow aisle of the Tupolev Tu-154 like caged predators. They demanded an immediate change of course to Medina, Saudi Arabia, a neutral ground from which they could broadcast their message. They were Chechen separatists, warriors fighting for freedom against a brutal Russian occupation. The passengers, their faces etched with fear and confusion, listened intently, struggling to comprehend the political complexities. Chechnya, a small, predominantly Muslim republic in the North Caucasus region of Russia, had long resisted Russian rule. The First Chechen War ended in a humiliating defeat for Russia, but the peace was short-lived. In 1999, Russian forces invaded Chechnya again, transforming Grozny into a smoldering ruin. The hijacking of Vnukovo Airlines Flight 2806 was a stark reminder of the human cost of this forgotten war. Among the passengers, a middle-aged Chechen man named Magomed sat hunched in his seat, his face a mask of sorrow. He had witnessed firsthand the horrors of the Chechen wars. Magomed, like many Chechens, had fled his homeland, seeking refuge from the violence. But the hijacking had shattered his fragile peace, forcing him to confront the ghosts that haunted his every waking moment. As the hijacked Tupolev Tu-154 soared southward, the world outside remained largely oblivious to the drama unfolding. In Moscow, the Russian government scrambled to respond, denouncing the hijackers as terrorists. The international community watched with a mixture of concern and apprehension. Human rights groups renewed their calls for a peaceful resolution to the Chechen crisis, their voices drowned out by the political and military machinery. The wheels of the Tupolev Tu-154 screeched as they met the tarmac in Medina, Saudi Arabia. Armed guards surrounded the aircraft, their presence a stark reminder of the precarious situation. Inside the cabin, the air hung heavy with a mixture of fear, anticipation, and the faintest glimmer of hope. The hijackers, their faces still hidden behind balaclavas, remained on edge. The passengers, exhausted and emotionally drained, clung to the hope that this unexpected landing might signal a turning point in their ordeal. Hours turned into an agonizing waiting game as the standoff on the tarmac in Medina stretched late into the night. The hijackers, their demands relayed through a Saudi negotiator, remained resolute safe passage to a country willing to grant them asylum and, more importantly, a platform to air their grievances about the Chechen conflict. Outside, the air crackled with tension as Saudi authorities, caught between their desire to resolve the situation peacefully and the need to protect the lives of the hostages, carefully considered their options. Floodlights illuminated the aircraft, casting long, eerie shadows across the tarmac, while security forces, armed and ready, maintained a tight perimeter around the grounded Tupolev. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere remained tense, a palpable fear lingering beneath the surface. The hijackers, their patience wearing thin, grew increasingly agitated, their voices rising in anger as negotiations stalled. The passengers, caught in the crosshairs of a geopolitical game they didn't understand, struggled to maintain a semblance of composure, their nerves frayed by the uncertainty and the ever-present threat of violence. The flight attendants, their training and professionalism tested to the limit, continued to move among the passengers, offering words of comfort and reassurance, their presence a small beacon of humanity in the midst of a terrifying ordeal. They distributed water and blankets, tending to the needs of the young and the elderly, their quiet acts of kindness a testament to the enduring power of human compassion, even in the face of unimaginable adversity. As the night wore on, a war of words replaced the threat of immediate violence. Through a Saudi negotiator, a lifeline of communication established between the hijackers and the outside world, the Chechen separatists laid bare their demands, their voices laced with a potent mix of desperation and defiance. Their primary goal, they insisted, was not bloodshed, but a platform to expose the plight of their people, the Chechen people, who they claimed were victims of Russian aggression and oppression. They demanded an end to the conflict in Chechnya, the withdrawal of Russian forces, and international recognition of Chechen independence. The world listened, captivated by the unfolding drama and the moral complexities it presented. News channels broadcast live updates from Medina, their screens filled with images of the grounded aircraft, the armed security forces, and the faces of the anxious relatives waiting for news of their loved ones. The hijackers, thrust into the global spotlight, used their moment on the world stage to detail the atrocities they claimed were being committed against Chechens. They spoke of villages razed, of civilians targeted, of a culture and an identity teetering on the brink of extinction. Their words, whether exaggerated or grounded in truth, struck a chord with many, forcing the world to confront the human cost of a conflict often relegated to the back pages of newspapers. As dawn broke over the desert, casting a soft golden light on the tense scene at Medina Airport, a glimmer of hope emerged from the protracted negotiations. The hijackers, their initial demands tempered by the realization that their options were limited, showed a willingness to compromise, their focus shifting from safe passage to a guarantee of safe haven for themselves and their families. The Saudi negotiators, their patience and diplomatic skills tested to the limit, sensed an opportunity to break the deadlock. They appealed to the hijackers' humanity, emphasizing the plight of the passengers, many of whom were women, children, and the elderly, their health and well-being deteriorating with each passing hour. The international community, galvanized by the hostage crisis, stepped up its involvement. Diplomats from Turkey and Russia arrived in Medina, their presence a sign of the growing urgency of the situation. Human rights organizations, their voices amplified by the global media attention, renewed their calls for a peaceful resolution, urging all parties to prioritize the safety and well-being of the hostages. The passengers, their fate hanging precariously in the balance, clung to the hope that a resolution was within reach. They prayed, they whispered words of encouragement to each other, and they drew strength from the knowledge that their ordeal had captured the world's attention. Their plight, a stark reminder of the human cost of conflict, and the urgent need for compassion and understanding. An unsettling quiet descended upon the hijacked Tupolev Tu-154, a silence pregnant with anticipation and dread. The previous day's flurry of negotiations had dwindled to a trickle, replaced by an uneasy truce between the hijackers and the Saudi authorities. The stifling desert heat seemed to amplify the tension, turning the aircraft's cabin into a pressure cooker of frayed nerves and unspoken fears. Outside, the activity around the plane had subtly shifted. The constant hum of engines from idling vehicles had ceased, replaced by an almost unnatural stillness. Gone were the throngs of security personnel and negotiators, leaving only a handful of figures strategically positioned around the aircraft. Their movements, once hurried and purposeful, were now measured and deliberate, their silhouettes stark against the blinding desert sun. Inside, the hijackers, their initial bravado seemingly diminished, paced the aisle with a nervous energy. Their faces, hidden behind the now familiar balaclavas, betrayed their growing fatigue and the immense pressure of their precarious situation. The weight of their actions, the lives they held in their hands, seemed to bear down on them, their eyes constantly scanning the cabin, their fingers never straying far from the triggers of their weapons. The passengers, their initial terror giving way to a weary resignation, huddled together in small groups, seeking solace in shared whispers and silent prayers. The air, thick with the stench of sweat, fear, and stale air, seemed to crackle with anticipation. Every creak of the aircraft's fuselage, every rustle from outside sent a jolt of fear through the cabin, a stark reminder that their ordeal was far from over. Section 2, Operation Desert Dawn. Unbeknownst to the hijackers, a plan was unfolding under the cover of darkness. Saudi Arabian special forces, their faces camouflaged with grease paint, moved like phantoms across the darkened tarmac, their movements silent and precise. Operation Desert Dawn, a daring rescue mission meticulously planned and rehearsed, was about to be put into action. The element of surprise was their greatest weapon. The hijackers, exhausted and lulled into a false sense of security by the apparent stalemate, had let their guard down. They had underestimated the resolve of the Saudi authorities and the lengths to which they were willing to go to ensure the safety of the hostages. Under the cover of darkness, a small team of commandos, armed with silenced weapons and specialized breaching equipment, stealthily approached the aircraft from multiple angles. Their every move was coordinated, their breathing synchronized, their focus laser-sharp. They were ghosts in the night, their presence undetected, their mission critical. Inside the aircraft, the first sign of the impending assault came as a deafening crash. The forward cabin door, breached by explosives, burst inward, sending shards of metal and fragments of the door flying through the air. The commandos, their faces grim masks of determination, stormed the aircraft, their movements swift and brutal, their training kicking in with deadly precision. Section 3, A Trail of Blood and Tears. Chaos erupted within the confined space of the aircraft. The hijackers, caught off guard but reacting with a desperate ferocity, opened fire, their bullets ripping through the cabin, shredding the fragile peace that had held for the past 2 days. Screams pierced the air as passengers, their bodies jolted by the sudden violence, scrambled for cover, their desperate cries swallowed by the deafening roar of gunfire and the chilling clang of metal on metal. The commandos, their training taking over, returned fire, their movements honed by years of experience, their aim deadly accurate. They moved with a terrifying efficiency, their bodies shields for the terrified passengers, their only goal to neutralize the threat and secure the aircraft. The battle, though brief, was brutal. The confined space of the aircraft's cabin became a whirlwind of violence, the air thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the coppery tang of blood. Passengers, caught in the crossfire, huddled beneath seats, their bodies pressed against the floor, their eyes squeezed shut against the horrifying reality unfolding around them. One of the hijackers, mortally wounded, slumped against a bulkhead, his finger still twitching on the trigger of his weapon. Another, his face contorted in a mask of rage and fear, sprayed the cabin with bullets before collapsing to the floor, his body riddled with bullet holes. The third hijacker, realizing the futility of his situation, detonated his explosives vest in a final act of defiance, engulfing the rear of the aircraft in a blinding flash and a deafening roar. Section 1, A Pyrrhic Victory. The echoes of gunfire faded, replaced by a chilling silence punctuated by the moans of the wounded and the sobs of the traumatized. The air, thick with the stench of gunpowder and the coppery tang of blood, hung heavy in the shattered cabin. Operation Desert Dawn, the daring rescue mission, had come at a terrible cost. 3 passengers lay dead, their lives cut short by a conflict that had reached out from the distant mountains of Chechnya. They were casualties of a war that had no winners, only victims. The surviving passengers, their faces etched with a mixture of relief and horror, stumbled out of the aircraft. They were met by a phalanx of Saudi soldiers and medical personnel. The world watched, transfixed, as the aftermath of the hijacking unfolded on their television screens. The hijacking of Vnukovo Airlines Flight 2806 had become a global tragedy. Section 2. Scars that remain. The world grappled with the complexities of the Chechen conflict and the motivations behind desperate measures. Hijackers became symbols of Chechen resistance, their actions both condemned and lauded. The Russian government faced renewed pressure to seek a peaceful resolution. Images of dead hostages reminded the world of the human cost. Families of victims struggled to come to terms with their loss. They mourned their loved ones, their grief amplified by senseless deaths. Survivors carried the scars of the hijacking, both visible and invisible. The hijacking of Vnukovo Airlines Flight 2806 remained a stark reminder of human resilience and the hope for peace.